and it is being recorded. The recordings and other details of the board's work are available on the Department of Labor's website. I'd like to give all of my fellow board members the opportunity to introduce themselves, beginning with the members who are here with me in Albany, followed by the board members attending at our Church Street location in New York City. And let's start with Dan McGraw.
Good afternoon or good morning. I'm Dan McGraw with the New York State Conference of Operating Engineers.
Christopher Lund, retired New York State DOL.
Al Catalano, Secretary Treasury, New York State Building and Construction Trades.
Okay, I'm Commissioner Reardon from the Department of Labor.
And I'm Sean McCready, Director of the Bureau of Public Work and Secretary to the Board.
And in New York City, starting with Gary LaBarbera.
Hi, Gary LaBarbera, President of the Building and Construction Trades Council of Greater New York.
Jim Whelan of the Real Estate Board of New York.
Hope Knight, President, Empire State Development.
Peter Flory, representing Long Island Builders Institute and New York State Builders Association.
Thank you very much. Labor Law Section 224C requires this body to hold public hearings prior to making a recommendation that applies to all projects and hold confidential proceedings prior to making a determination related to specific existing or potential covered projects. At our last meeting, we directed Board Secretary Sean McCready to develop a process for how these hearings and proceedings will operate. As we go through each of the recommended procedures, all of which were sent to the board in May, Sean will provide a short summary prior to our discussion. During the discussion, Sean will note any comments. If there are proposed amendments to the procedures, we will discuss them and vote on each of these edits and then vote on the procedures. So let's begin with the first recommended procedure for this board to identifying potentially covered projects. Sean, please provide a summary.
Number one, inquiries as to whether a project is a covered project for purposes of Labor Law Section 224A and under the purview of the board may be identified through one of the following ways. For example, A, the request for a coverage determination is submitted to the chair, an individual member of the board, or the Department of Labor's Bureau of Public Work. B, the complaint of underpayment or on a potentially covered project is submitted to the chair, an individual member of the board, or the Bureau of Public Work. C, the chair, an individual board member, or the Bureau learns of the potentially covered project without receiving a specific determination request or complaint. Section 2, step 2, the chair, an individual board member, or the Bureau of Public Works staff submits the request, inquiry, or complaint to the secretary. Step 3, the secretary notifies the board of the existence of a potentially covered project. Step 4, all available information is forwarded to the secretary, and the Bureau of Public Work conducts a preliminary research fact-finding to gather information regarding the project cost, type and amount of the subsidies involved, location and nature of the project, identity of the owners, developers, other contractors or subcontractors involved, and any past history with the Bureau of Public Work by any involved parties, and other relevant information. Step 5, an individual report is generated for the board by the Bureau of Public Work containing the original information that flagged or identified the project, the Bureau's preliminary findings, recommendations for any additional information that could be relevant to obtain before making a final determination, and an assessment by the Bureau of Public Work of how Labor Law 224A would or would not be enforced based upon the available information, should the board elect not to issue a determination. During this process, if the Bureau identifies projects clearly under 3.5 million in construction costs, and ones receiving less than 20% of its funding from public subsidies will be deemed by the Bureau as uncovered, and the Bureau will notify the board on a quarterly basis of projects deemed as such. Step 6, the individual report is distributed to the board members for review. 7, at a meeting of the board during an executive session to maintain confidentiality required by Labor Law 224C, as discussions relate to a specific project or individual, the board members vote as to whether they wish to issue a determination, not issue a determination, or conduct additional fact-finding. If a majority of the board declines to issue a determination, then the secretary shall notify the requesting or impacted party of the board's determination. The Bureau will provide written notice whether or not Labor Law 224A shall be enforced, predicated upon the information known at that time, and subject to any determination the board may choose to issue in the future should new information be discovered. If a majority of the board chooses to issue a determination without conducting additional fact-finding, then the secretary shall notify the requesting or impacted party of the board's determination. And if a majority of the board wishes to conduct a fact-finding hearing, then the chair may call for a confidential hearing about the specific project or individual. The board members will provide their availability, and the chair shall set a hearing date and make requests for documentation and testimony to be secured for the hearing.
Thank you, Sean. So, do any of the board members have any questions or comments on this first process proposal on whether projects are covered under the law and the purview of this board? And I'll look first at New York. Yes, New York. Does anyone in New York have a comment or question?
Yes, I have many, many questions. This could be a very long meeting.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, and if I'm correct, these were all shared with Sean in advance, so we were a little surprised that what was submitted for this meeting did not reflect any of the questions. So why don't we start from the top? On point number 1, where it talks about the board, may be identified through one of the following channels. So are the channels enumerated in this proposal the only channels? Are there possibly other channels?
Conceivably, these were the primary methods I could think of that one could come to our attention, but individual board, it was basically to try and establish a rough framework of all the different possibilities. It does mention this, for example, ultimately, regardless of how it comes to either the boards, the secretaries, the bureaus, the chair's attention, the idea is that it then gets distributed and the entire board, being the chair, is notified. So if there's a way one comes to our attention, our collective attention, that isn't one of these 3, then no, it's not as if it would be ignored. It would just...
Could you give me an example of some other way that it would be brought to our attention, Jim?
Well, no, I mean, that's what we're trying to define. I mean, I think we need to take a step back here and understand that, I mean, if this is designed to make development and construction more difficult in New York State, then we ought to continue to go in this route where things are nebulous and not well-defined, because that'll just freeze people in motion in terms of wanting to move forward and build. I mean, we should be setting forward clear standards to the public, to the development and construction community about what the rules of the road are going to be about the Public Subsidy Board. You know, we're going to get to later issues in this meeting about terminology that just simply isn't defined. So, you know, for example, is there a formal request that gets made to the board about a potential project, and who does that get sent to? Does it get sent to the chair? Is it subsequently distributed to the board, and in what time frame?
So I think what we say in A is if there is a request for a determination, it can come either to the chair, to an individual member of the board, or the Bureau of Public Work. Those are, regardless of who's making the request for determination, those are the 3 points of contact to ask for the board to convene on this project. I think that's pretty clear.
And then skipping forward to number 3, you know, what's shared with the board? So a request is made of the board, or a request is put forward to the chair, to what is shared with board members. And when is it shared?
I guess the idea would be that whatever information has been provided either to the board member, to the bureau, whatever we had would be shared with the board, so that information about the potential covered project is possible and essentially forthwith. I mean, it's not that it has to wait for a later meeting. It could just be as it comes in. The idea would be that we're notified.
But have you thought through what information you need in order to make a rendering whether or not something should be subject to the Public Subsidy Board? I mean, it wouldn't strike me that you take in any information. I mean, there's relevant information, right? I mean, what is the relevant information that you all are looking for?
But it appears to me, right, there's a preliminary investigation, and then after the preliminary investigation, it would be distributed to the board, right? So we're not being tasked with frivolous complaints, right? Is that what you're
So
getting?
how is that investigation conducted? Like, for example, will it be a standard practice to speak to the developer, to the owner? You know, is it clear to a developer and owner what information the board is going to be seeking from them in trying to help it render a determination and inform the board as to whether or not 224A applies?
I mean, investigation conducted sort of as, akin to how a regular public work investigation would go, at least at the outset. Yeah, it's just gathering any information that has to do with anything to do with project funding or subsidies received, or information about the nature of the project as some of the exemptions could be implicated. So, I mean, no, I don't think we need to gather things like what color is the building going to be, but anything that could possibly touch on the nature of the funding, the amount of the funding, the amount of subsidy, and the nature of the project itself would attempt to be gathered so the board has as much information as quickly as possible.
If we could jump down to paragraph 5, what are the circumstances in which a board would elect not to make a determination? I mean, it would strike me that this is pretty binary, is like the board's got to make a decision that 224A applies or it doesn't apply. It's not like a really third choice.
Essentially, the thought was, no, that may never happen, but it was simply covering the possibility. The law states that the board may issue a determination. So,
In the same paragraph, it talks about construction costs, but when you go to the statute, it actually refers to total construction project cost. So, I mean, it would strike me that this board and effort was based on the statute, and that, when it seeks to apply the law, it should be, mindful of what language is used in the statute. And by the way, I'm not even sure if we of a board have defined yet what total construction project cost means.
right, a lot of these things are for the board to determine. So the threshold mentioned in section 5 of, say it's under 3.5 or 20%, was merely a suggestion by me as a place to start. If the board would rather that any project over 3 million be forwarded with information, we can do that. It's ultimately board members. That was more of a.
I don't want to belabor this discussion. I mean, obviously, because this will continue on for the rest of what you're going to read, and I've only touched upon a portion of what we've covered. I can just say there's no way I feel comfortable seeing this move forward. I'm only one vote on this board. We would be happy to share after this meeting in writing to all the board members the information we've shared with you over the last few days in terms of further work we believe the board needs to do to progress this discussion so that there are clear, well-defined procedures moving forward for the development and construction community to understand, to ensure that what is needed to comply with local law, with the 224A.
I don't think, again, it's up to the board how they want to proceed and how detailed they want this procedure, the written procedure to be. I don't think the general framework cuts off the ability to issue further guidance on what is actually requested. This was more designed to just establish the basic procedure of how the board can do its work.
In other words, this is a framework for how the board approaches the work of the board. And if there are instances where more information is needed, you can certainly ask for that. We're not cutting that off. And the reason that the 3.5 million in construction costs and less than 20% of its funding are recommended to the board, the law says 5 million and 30%. We expanded that to give some comfort that people would understand when people fall within those ranges. But it's up to the board to decide if they're comfortable with that kind of definition or they want it tighter. But this is a template of how we're going to proceed. It's not exclusive of other things the board might want to look at.
I'd just like to add that I agree with everything that Jim has said, but that I'm not comfortable discussing dollar amounts for percentages without really knowing what the definition of returns are. That being said, I think that as I look at this, without knowing what the definitions are, it occurs to me that the 3.5 million and the 20% is way too low. I would certainly want to see that higher.
Okay.
Where did that come, Commissioner? I mean, where did that number come from? But
5 and the 20%?
It was just come from a general recognition of let's go far back enough.
I'm sorry, I can't really hear
Far
you.
that, to provide the most, projects to the board for consideration without, sending everything. Say somebody inquires, is my $100,000
Right.
project?
I will have to respectfully disagree with my colleagues on the board. I think this is a good outcome, and ultimately the law dictates what's covered and what's not covered, and I think we should be able to look at as many projects as possible to make that determination.
So
Gary, I'm not saying we should limit the projects that are under consideration. We just should have the rules of the game.
Yeah, but I think
about what
you were
gets
saying
spent.
you don't agree with the projects, right? Is that what I understood?
No, I'm just saying that the percentage is the way I look at this is kind of an initial determination. If it appears that something is below 20%, the statute says 30, that at 20%, they're automatically out. I think that percentage should be higher.
So understand that the reason the 20% and the 3.5 million is there is to provide enough room for projects that might be determined in or out, to give the board projects to look at. If somebody is at 3.5 and 20%, they're not automatically determined to be covered by this law. It just simply
Right. No, I understand.
Right, that's my point.
make a determination. The board can decide if they don't want to look at those parameters, they want to tighten the parameters, that's certainly up to you. The law itself, as you know, says 5 million and 30%.
And additionally, the point in going on, there would be every single project inquiry, one we learned about collectively, would still ultimately be presented to the board. It's mentioned as a quarterly report. It's more of, do you need to hear about every single one right away when it seems like it's easily below the thresholds?
Yeah.
But you still find out about it. So say something
Right, that's my thought.
that was raised at the quarterly report review is like, wait, can we go back and still look at this one, even though it looks like it's only 15% or 3 million? For whatever reason the board chooses, we can absolutely bring it back to the front and include it in something that is considered. The idea is to still present everything to the board, just not.
Make it every board determination.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just makes common sense to have some type of common sense delineation as far as what cases are actually brought every time to the board. But I think what you just stated was whatever case comes in, let's assume it's a $3.5 million cutoff. We're gonna get a report on those cases, right? And if somebody, a board member or somebody else says, geez, I want more information on that particular project that you guys administratively initially said it's not covered because it's, affordable housing. We're still gonna get a copy of that, or we're gonna be notified, and anybody could raise an issue saying, I want more information on that project, right? And what were the facts, or what was the funding, et cetera. So, I mean, I understand the question about you want a higher threshold, but it seems like just to make sense to move this forward, we have to have some type of administrative rules or procedures that make sense. I don't know where the 3.5 came from. Makes sense to me, but I don't know what you know.
There came from just discussions and thoughts. What is a high enough number where we're not sending everything right away, but low enough where projects that could have been borderline, or maybe there's something odd about it, would still get forwarded right away. So that was just more of a compromise number that I came up with that is completely separate.
And you initially agree with it, and you're gonna look at, but that's how you're.
And as in terms of information gathering and how we're deciding, does it meet, for argument's sake, the 3.5 or 20%? That is contingent on what the board ultimately decides definitions and various things are going to mean. It's not as if we're going to do this in a vacuum. We're getting to that part later. Then later in the meeting we discuss the process for making the broad recommendations. Once that process is ultimately adopted, then those recommendations can be made, and then those decisions by the board will be the criteria by which the Bureau conducts that investigation.
Let me also point out that during the process of this board, over time, you have the ability to go back to these procedures and say, these parameters are too wide, we're seeing too many projects. We'd like to narrow that lens. You absolutely have the authority to do that. But we're setting the procedures now so that we can begin the work that you need to do.
And that just,
You know, if we had a clear set of procedures and a clear set of definitions, but that would result in a clarification of what projects would be coming before the board. Let me go in a slightly different direction, and this will probably be a theme throughout. But are there any timelines associated with the different facets of identifying potentially covered projects? Like the board receives a project, how long before it sort of goes out to, and that information is disseminated to the board? How long is it going to take to do an investigation? I mean, let's put this in perspective. What we're talking about is folks making multi-million-dollar decisions to move forward with projects, employ people, create jobs, et cetera. And at the same time, there'll be this process that's ill-defined that will have a substantial economic impact on whether or not that project proceeds. I mean, if anyone's dealt, and I know you have, dealt with the area of development and construction, what individuals and players in that realm crave is predictability, right? So it's one of the reasons, for example, the Euler process worked pretty well in New York City. It's a 7-month process. You know who the actors are. You know what information is relevant. That's not what we have before us today.
Right. So we have had conversations about timelines. And again, these are things that we can certainly address and come back to and edit if we need more finite limits. I appreciate what you're saying, and we certainly don't want to have some sort of open-ended investigation that stalls the construction, because that's not what we're here for. We can set language in here, you know, timely reports, timely setting of meetings. I hesitate to put a hard date on it because there are often extenuating circumstances that make that hard date hard to meet. Also in the middle of a holiday, there's a pandemic suddenly happens. You know, there are things that hard dates make it difficult to actually get our work done, but I'm very open to timely, even saying 45 to 60 days. You have a quarterly meeting, so, you know, that's set. But if you want it faster than that, we can say 45 to 60 days with the understanding that there may be extenuating circumstances in individual cases.
I worked for a public official in the past who was noted for noting publicly that government doesn't like deadlines, but that actually government needs a deadline to act.
So,
Commissioner, I do think a timeline with a range is helpful to be predictable, as James just said, for the owners of these projects to have some range of magnitude.
I think a timeline for the Bureau submitting a report that makes sense. Like I said, it's not as subject to difficulties as, say, convening a meeting, and it could simply note if there's more information we're anticipating when it's generated. So if the board feels strongly that once a project is, you know, once they're notified of a project, once it comes in, regardless of what information we are able to find out, within X number of days, a report will be sent so that the ball can be kept rolling, and the report can simply note if there's still outstanding records we're anticipating or unanswered questions. So at least, you know, the process is moving forward with an anticipated timeline. So at least contractors, project owners can at least know, you know, how quickly the board will be considering it.
so for instance, would that go to point 6, the individual report is distributed for review, or would that go, where would it go in this procedure?
You can go on number 5, a report is generated within a certain amount of time for the board review.
Okay,
Or 6, it can be distributed by X number of days subsequent to the discovering the existence of the project or the project being flagged.
so under number 5, an individual report is generated for the board. What would you like to see as a timeline, knowing that we have to have extenuating circumstances language? And Sean, for you, since you're people who report.
I mean, we'll do it as quickly as the board wants. We'll get as much information as
So-
soon as we
I would do 45.
do a report and continue working on it, and there would always be a follow-up report once it's. So you tell me.
But there are really 2 steps that will also involve timelines. One of which is the report coming in, and then there's also the additional time for the determination, as I see here. So
Let's take them one at a time. First, let's talk about when.
just pointing that out.
And we have a quarterly meeting already established, but we want individual reports to have a timeline attached. What's the recommendation? Is it 45 days? Is it 30 days? I mean,
Want to do 30, 45? We were on, you're good, Legend,
Yeah, it's 45 days to do what?
For the report.
for the report. Right. We think, at least, I think there's agreement here in New York City, 45 days. Makes sense? And if you want to add something about extenuating circumstances, you know, I don't think any of us would object to that,
so the
at least here in New York.
so let me just, for everybody, so you know what we're talking about. The amendment will be under number 5 on page 4.
Right.
Pages are the same, but an individual report is generated for the board by the BWD within 45 days of receipt. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think for all of us, soon, you know, that gives, I think, enough time administratively, but we want the information as quickly as, you know, possible.
Well, it would be within 45 days, so we're not gonna wait. For
Yes, yeah, that's better.
So is there any opposition to that amendment, to this particular point? Okay.
And that assumes cooperation from all parties that you're requesting
Yes.
information from.
Well, and if you're not getting cooperation, that's a whole nother story.
That's part of the report.
Yeah.
Extenuating
Yeah.
circumstances, right?
Look at the report, simply sends, and it would just be, we didn't have this information because we have not received records, we have not gotten this. It would still be sent within, like I said, within that 45 days, unless we were preparing to send it on day 44 and a pandemic. It's that would be, it would be
Yeah.
like, you know, sending records.
That would never happen.
Ever. So I guess maybe it makes most sense to add it to 6, then the report would be distributed to the board within 45 days of the initial report of the project coming in, or however.
But you're the wordsmith on that stuff, I don't know. Okay, so that's the first instance of setting a timeline.
But I just, so this is, but the preliminary report would still be that 3.5, and you guys, that would just be done administratively, and if you feel it goes, this would be a
Yeah,
report.
that's their job.
So it was 45 days from the project being identified.
Correct, from 45 days from.
We receive the
From
request.
writing of the instance,
Yeah.
via whichever method it came in.
So to be clear, Peter, it's not the initiation of the project, it's our receipt of a request for determination.
Will there be an application?
Yeah, so when it comes to, is there, you know, how can someone request a determination? Part of the commissioner's duties, the Department of Labor by extension's duties under this law is to create a form for a company to certify a project. So if someone just on their own, we believe we're covered or not covered, they can certify. The Bureau has developed a form that's basically a modification of our request for wage schedule, request for PRC number form, which will also facilitate the projects, and by triggering a wage schedule being distributed, triggering a PRC number to track the project, that is a special identifier and make it a public subsidy project. On that form, my thought would be to basically add a line, are you requesting a determination right then and there? So it's all one-stop shopping, so to speak, one form. They can either certify we are not covered, or we're not sure, we'd like the board to weigh in. So it's just one step for people, and that form also contains a number of, a good deal of language regarding the law itself, directions, instructions, and things such as that.
So when that form is received by the chair of the board, that triggers the 45 days.
That would trigger it, or if we found out about the project before they sent the form in, that would trigger the 45 days. We do it as, you know, the sooner.
But how would one know that? Like, that's what I don't understand. That's
Confirmation of
just,
receipt.
why wouldn't it just be the submission of the form?
I'm not sure, what do you mean, just the submission of the form?
You mean, how would the contractor know that somebody outside of the contractor could flag this for determination? Is that the question?
I'm trying to understand what triggers the start of the 45 days.
Receipt of a request for determination, either the form from the contract from the project or another source. I don't know who the other source would be.
And how is that acknowledged?
The other source?
The receipt, how is the receipt acknowledged?
As per this, it would be if the project is learned about through some other method than someone certifying it or requesting a determination, just through conversation, a board member, public work investigator, somebody learns of a project, as soon as it's established that that is a real project that could potentially be covered, in my thought process, that would also trigger the 45 days. We'd immediately notify the chair that, hey, we've learned about this project. We've begun our initial fact-finding. The board's notified that we have begun that initial investigation. 45 days, for us to get the report starts then, even if a formal request for determination hasn't come in. So that way, as little time as possible is wasted.
Dan?
Well, for example, if somebody calls me as a board member and inquires about a particular project and thinks it's covered, so the 45 days, I'm the only person who knows that, and it takes me a week to.
You need to tell
call
us.
you. So when would the 45 days start? The person contacted me, or reach out to people?
I'm not sure when we notify the full board of the existence so that you're aware of this project. Like I said, if again, something, it's a personal emergency and you're not able to notify us for 40 days, for whatever reason, again, that's up to the board. If you want that to trigger the 45, we can send a report 5 days after that. It just might not have that much, and then we can do a follow-up. It's really up to the board. But for me, once that formal notification to the board goes out, that seems most likely to trigger the 45. And in terms of how quickly is the full board notified, I don't know how you put a hard requirement on that for that reason I just mentioned. It's just forthwith, as soon as humanly possible, notify us. And without delay, right in there, the secretary will notify the full board that we want about this.
Okay, Gary?
Commissioner, so, to Danny's point, he says, like, the way this is written, if a board member is notified, I'm not 100% sure that's the most efficient way of doing things. Couldn't it be whether the chair or the secretary or the bureau is notified? I don't know that it's the most efficient way. And this is, I think, Danny's point, why he raises this, that, Danny may get a call from somebody to find out or start the process, or Hope may, or Jim may, or Al may, and then then it becomes incumbent upon us to notify you. And then does the timeline start when we're notified or when we notify you? Why can't it be that if there is a request for a determination, it goes either to the chair or the secretary or to the bureau, to the department? That's my thought. I just don't know if it's the most efficient way to start the clock if individual board members now assume the responsibility of accepting these requests for information.
It also makes it sort of anecdotal, frankly.
It should be, the secretary or the chair will
Right.
notify the board. That's what
And ideally, this is the idea of an individual board member being notified. That was really just a catch-all of let's not rule that out as a possibility. The idea is that to, educate people and get it so that people are requesting a formal request for determination when it's necessary. It was more of just like I said, trying to cover that possibility of someone learning about a project and us not wanting to delay on it and wait for a request to come in.
I understand. Look, we all want to move this. We all want, to move this, I think.
What I'm hearing is we would like to strike in number.
But I'm just, yes, I think that notification needs to go, as we said, to the chair, to the secretary, to the department, the bureau. I just think that's the best way to do that. And as board members, we should be prepared if we do get a request to know what the procedure is and say, well, thank you for calling. The formal procedure is, as part of the procedures that was adopted by this board, is you have to notify either the chair, the secretary, or the department. And that's it.
Yeah.
Because it becomes too arbitrary and ambiguous if each of us are going to be getting phone calls, which could happen, saying, hey, can you find out if this project is covered for me?
So
You have to streamline it.
formalize it and say an official determination request.
Yes, yes,
The chair, the secretary to the board, or the.
I would agree.
So we could amend 1C to say that if an individual member of the board, the bureau, or chair learns of a project without a specific request for termination, that individual will notify, the department.
Also in A, because a request for a coverage determination is submitted to the chair, the Department of Labor's bureau, or the, change it here too. You don't want it to be the individual board member's responsibility.
Yeah, no,
So it would be, if someone learns of a project without a formal request for termination, then that person will notify the inquiring party, the party who mentioned the project, that the formal
Simplify it.
process is to submit it to the bureau via this form,
Yes,
and that's what they must do.
yes,
yes,
And like I said, so in that circumstance,
take the members out.
the 45 days will trigger once they submit the formal request. Anecdotally, then, if that member wants to notify, the secretary / director of public work that they made that requirement, it's not incumbent upon them, but if they do, we could start early and, start at fact finding.
I think
So it gives us extra time, but we don't have to make it a
start with
requirement.
official, make it simple.
Okay.
An official
I agree.
is made to these people, period.
That's what I feel. I think we all agree here.
Is everybody good with
That
that?
makes perfect sense.
So,
Yeah, perfect sense.
good. I'm all in favor of simplicity. So next, I think to Peter's question, Peter, you had two timeline questions. The first one we've dealt with, when is the determination report issued? The second one was what?
Well, so there's a preliminary, the 45 days will result in a preliminary determination. Is that right?
Is that right?
So
45 days.
45, what happens, what needs to happen by the end of 45 days?
that the bureau has sent all of its initial fact-finding data that's been accumulated, discovered upon the project to the board, so they're aware of all the information possible.
It's on page 5.
No. Then part of it would be, the timeline we have to discuss would be how soon after that report is distributed, the board wants a meeting called to address it. Do we want to put a hard time on it, or we can say within the next X number of days, the chair will call for a board meeting?
So within the 45 days, the determination will be made as to whether or not it meets the threshold requirement.
Well, that's what it's, once the report is distributed to the board, the question becomes, how soon after that distribution date does the board want to convene to
Have a hearing,
have a
right?
hearing?
Well, can I ask you a question? So you get a notification, the way we just agreed we're gonna get the notification. And it's something that, at least in the department's opinion, clearly does not fall under the statute. So it's historic funding or whatever. And you generate a report within 45 days. So that particular case, would the report be, if you had those facts, or we looked into it, it's not covered, as part of the report. And then there's another thing in the report. We had an inquiry about a project that may very well be covered.
Right.
So you send a notification to the board about these projects. Wouldn't we want to look at the one that, we'd have to approve whether or not the one that you said wasn't covered? We'd have to look at that and agree or disagree. And then the other one that may be questionable, you're saying, should we schedule a board hearing? Wouldn't we consider all those at the next regularly scheduled
You could.
board hearing? I mean,
You
just have a
could.
list of, here's the ones we've sent you all reports. Here's the number in the queue that we think we need to have a hearing on or a fact find,
I mean,
as opposed to scheduling separate
Yeah.
dates initially.
that does work, I think, because again, you're talking about, again, only a maximum of another 45 days. Say we've learned about a project the day tomorrow.
Right.
So now, within 45 days, the board will have a report, then there's only 45 days left after that.
For the next meeting.
For the recording meeting anyway, So that gives, that amount of time to consider, take it so that at the next quarterly meeting, everybody's ready to discuss it.
On the other hand, I think Peter's point, if we find out about this before, like right before this meeting, there's not enough time to pull the information together, then you can always ask for a separate meeting. You will definitely have the quarterly meetings. The board has the authority to expedite, ask for an expedited hearing.
Yeah, my concern is that waiting 3 months for determination, in the scheme of things, is I think is a burden.
It can be adjusted.
Then you
That's why
can
I'm
call-
suggesting that
yeah.
we just keep this in fairness to everybody who's got a question about the project. If we have the information and we can actually consider it at the next meeting, I mean, maybe I'm missing, if you think, well, the next meeting's too far down the road, we should get a determination prior to that, the board has the authority to convene a meeting. It's like
The
some
longest
member
you
says,
can
"We
have is
wanna have a
40
meeting."
days. Yeah, the longest you can wait is 1 quarter. You can shorten that quarter.
Let's just make sure I'm clear.
Yeah.
If we receive the request for determination every day of the month, those 45-day calendars are gonna be different. correct?
Yeah.
So you're gonna, Sean and his staff receive a request, or we bring a request, or someone, either somebody else brings a request in. That 45-day calendar is gonna constantly be rolling, right? So that's something we would have to consider, that
You could be constantly convening.
constantly,
Now, there will be, I personally don't have any idea how many will come. Yeah, because it's not I just don't know. I think that the limitations exclude, on the high end and the low end, a lot of development. And the question is, how many are gonna fall within these parameters that then need to be considered by the board? And for that, I currently don't have an answer. But you're right, Chris, you could end up with a rolling calendar of.
It's just, I think some of the concerns from the business community is timely response. And
Yeah, and I get it.
we don't want to create something
Yeah.
where we ourselves have created something that's going to push it out. Where we
Yes.
can, Sean and his staff bring all these facts together and we're pretty clear.
Yeah.
It's going to make it a lot more efficient, I think, for everybody in the business.
Right.
One way we could limit that is to raise the dollar threshold, as I suggested earlier, and also the percentage, say 4 million and 25%, and that'll limit it somewhat.
Say that
He's
again.
talking about preliminary report, threshold on preliminary.
After the threshold of
Right.
3.5, she's suggesting 4 million and 25%.
And so how do you all feel about that?
I mean, to me, just common sense, there's gotta be a threshold, so we're not burdened with every.
It's still well below the,
But if you're gonna
what's in
get,
the legislation.
you're gonna generate a report that said, these cases came in, to me, whether it's 4 million or 3.5 million or 25% versus 20, as long as we're going to get the response or the report from you, that we can look at and question if we had questions.
I'll support that.
Right.
Yeah, I'll support what Danny's saying.
Yeah,
So we can, at this stage, I mean, one thought is to raise the threshold so you're not considering too much, but
125.
could, at the beginning, not have the threshold also. If we just generate a report on everything comes in, you might start getting ones of, somebody made an inquiry about a $1 million project. And over time, if it starts to become too burdensome, procedures can be readdressed and we can add thresholds. If there's a concern about exactly what the threshold is or not hearing our project soon enough, again, it's up to the board. We can start off with just everything that comes in as a request for determination, or we tell, hey, submit a certification request for determination, and we'll generate a report and send it. Again, it's up to the board.
And an example would be the three projects you sent us. That'd be the type of example. You looked at it, determine the facts at hand, made a determination, and share that with the board.
right.
But it may give the board a sense of how many projects are really coming in
That's,
and the type of information people are bringing projects which may clearly not be covered. That's something we think about how to address, you know, but also it might give you a sense at the beginning.
Yeah.
Without being words.
So,
So as we generate a report anyway, to ultimately notify the board of the ones that we administratively determined were below this threshold. So.
Yeah, I like the idea.
Exactly how, what do I say? We could just do it on every project at the beginning.
That's fine.
is that good? How do the folks in New York feel?
I would agree with that. We should be notified. The board should be notified of all the projects. Even the ones that were clearly not just, easily identified as not falling under 224A. We should just be made aware of it as a board.
But we're talking about just about the timeline. So the board receives an application, we're gonna be told about it.
Yes.
In the
Right.
report.
Yeah,
Right.
in the report.
And how long is it gonna
Report.
take, how long is it gonna take the staff to inform the board? Could be a few days, right? I mean, like, what's so complicated? Like, they get notified about a project,
Oh, you mean each project? Then we got an email, this project is,
it's like 10 days.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah,
I mean, this gets back to where I started, like, this should all be spelled out, like the process. We haven't even gotten to the part about the project, the owner, developer, how well informed are they gonna be about the process? So are they gonna be informed that their project has been put on the radar screen of the board? And then are they gonna be notified, are they gonna be contacted during the investigation or the research? And then are they gonna be notified about the individual report?
Ultimately, again, it's the board if they want them to be, but for the Bureau to conduct fact finding, it's inevitable that they would learn of it. We'd have to be reaching out and gathering information. The owner developer would be one of the primary sources to go to for it. So.
It's not set in these rules that were submitted. I mean, this was a point we made to you in the last few days.
Well, I understand that, but I also,
Where else would we get the information?
point of not.
But, well, Commissioner, with all due respect, if that's the case, then it should say it in there.
And again, but that was basically, it was left for us to discuss today. That's why, you brought up the fact that the points you raised in the last few days weren't reflected in this document that's distributed today. And that was, so the point was to address all of the concerns today and make modifications as necessary, rather than trying to make modifications the last couple of days that could end up in the same place. We're still discussing them. So we can absolutely do that if the board wants the secretary to notify them that a request for determination has come in and we put down an investigation within the week, 5 days, we'll do that. And then within the 45 days, if that's what is chosen, the report will come in. Yes, we don't have to wait the 45 days, like, oh, by the way, there's a project, request for determination came in 40 days ago, here's a report. You can put it on the board's radar immediately, if that's what the board wants.
Is that what the board wants?
What I'll be looking for out of this meeting is a revised set of rules in much more detail, put forward to the board in advance of the next meeting so that, we can try to build consensus going into that meeting and avoid a protracted discussion like this at the next board meeting.
So, I'm sorry, counsel,
Hi,
why don't you come here so they can,
so one thing I just want to point out,
because we're in an open meeting, right?
yes, so, hi, Laura Campion, Deputy General Counsel. So one item I just want to point out is that this board is subject to the open meetings law, which means that you can't build consensuses outside of an open meeting. So that's part of the reason why, a draft was submitted to the board so that it could spark this kind of discussion that's very important for, anybody who's interested to hear, right? So I get a little nervous whenever anyone says anything about building a consensus, right? Because this is the
This is the place to
location
build the consensus.
and the place to build that consensus. And I just want to make sure we're all clear on that.
No, it's a very good point to raise. I think another legal consideration to take into account is that the rules that are ultimately adopted by this board satisfy due process, right? So that's going to be an important, and we haven't had legal counsel look at that yet, but that is something we will do.
Is it permissible in open meeting law for us to go back and redraft our proposal and
Absolutely.
and
So-
submit it to the body and then have another open meeting and discussion about it?
Yep, it absolutely is. It's also permissible for other board members to create their own drafts or recommendations on edits, submit it, to Sean for distribution prior to the next meeting. But those discussions on the proposals should happen in an open meeting
Right.
session, not in emails or in any sort of interaction outside of the open meeting.
Right. And
Thank you for anticipating my next question.
Yes, so might I suggest that the topics that have floated up already for everybody, because I know Jim has written them down, but the topics are timeliness, clarity of process, thresholds. We know we have the definitions to do, and that's for another meeting, but for these procedural pieces, what I'm hearing is a desire for more refinement of the language, more precise language, in the spirit of who initiates the determination. That was a great discussion, take the board members out of it. For the timeliness, putting time limits with the understanding that they might be expansive, great conversation. The discussion about, does the board get a quarterly review of all of the projects that have been submitted? Absolutely. So in that spirit, I think we could take this discussion, I could reconvene us in a week or two. All of you could put on your thinking caps and your writing caps and submit to us your requests, and we can facilitate that at the next meeting. Would that be amenable for the board members? Would that be helpful?
Yes. I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah, I think there's some
Yes.
more items we want to, there's an interest to go through. I mean, Commission, I believe we were calendared for 2 hours today. I would like to use our time because I would like to actually be here present to hear other concerns rather than just, getting it in writing. I think it's helpful that if we have the ability to speak, we've been able to accomplish a number of things already just through this process, as you already delineated, and perhaps there's some more things we could clarify today and then get a revised version and then make comments and meet it in 2 weeks. But I would like to continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna cut it off here.
Well, that was one suggestion, but yeah. So in that vein, let's continue with the procedures that we have in front of us. We've gotten down to the individual report. We've talked about, where are we at 7? Is that where we stopped?
Actually, I think we backtracked a little bit. Is there a short time frame the board would like to be notified of a potential covered project that's requested determination, in advance of the report, like within 5 days, 10 days, that there's a project out there and that a report is coming?
Which would be in addition to the 45-day notification.
This is going to number 3. So the secretary notices the board of the existence of potentially covered projects that may require determination within X number of days. 10 days?
Yeah, what, can we do 10 days?
Sure.
Do whatever the board wants.
Does 10 days work for everybody? Anybody object?
So this particular notification would just be, hey, here's
Hey,
a
your report's
project.
coming
Yes.
within the
So
next
you
45
just send an email to the board members, or while we're getting into the nitty gritty here, right? Well, here's the ones that came in this week. FYI, we sent them out to you within 10 days. This
No,
project.
you're not sending the report out, you're sending a
Just a
notification that
notification.
request for determination's been made.
Essentially, yeah.
That would just be in the form of an email to the board
Yeah.
members.
That's correct.
Good. Another one we accomplished.
So
Now we're at 7.
we're at 7. So the board members vote whether to issue a determination, not issue a determination, or conduct additional fact finding. I think the question was, how do you not determine?
Right, I think that was raised, is when would the board ever just not issue a determination? Maybe you never will. The law simply said may issue a determination, so I put that in there as a possibility.
Jim?
No, I'm sorry, it's just on the computer screen here, needs to be addressed.
Oh, sorry. Oh. Is ITS asking us to register our computer?
Yes.
It happens. So that's just is everybody good with that explanation?
Yes.
Okay. Then you have the 3 steps. If they decline to issue a determination, if the board chooses to issue a determination without additional fact finding, and then what you do if you need a fact finding hearing. And again, board members will provide their availability. The chair shall set a hearing date. We need a time on that, or are we good with timely?
I'm sorry, can you explain again why the board would decline to issue a determination?
It is because the law says may and doesn't say shall. The board, for whatever reason, may decline to issue a determination. I can't imagine when that would happen, but it's because of the way the law is written. It doesn't demand you determine, it says you may determine.
If a project is $1 million and has not-for-profit funding and has historical tax, there's 5 different exemptions and is super low, does the board want to go through the motions of a formal determination that you're clearly not covered, or just decline and
Let it go.
subsection 8, outlines the board, the Bureau notifies the board is declined to issue a determination. You are not subject to the law based on, my enforcement power of Article 8. Maybe the board will never do that and will want to just issue a determination that you're not covered or covered on every single project. That's perfectly good.
Isn't that sort of a de facto determination that it's not covered?
Yes.
Well, that leads to this question. So, for example, the 3 cases that you sent us the information on,
Right.
or future cases like that where the determination, at least in-house, was it's not covered. So you present those to the board. Do we affirmatively ratify that, or?
You don't mention it.
All right, so by us, just, you give us the report, these aren't covered, and we're silent, we don't vote on anything, we're just not covered.
The Bureau has made the decision.
Make the decision, so maybe that's why it's like, we can make a determination.
That's,
Yeah.
like I
You
said,
didn't take the affirmative action of voicing an opinion.
it's really just that fail-safe of if, for whatever reason, board doesn't, but
That's why it says may.
meaning you can on every single one of them, make that determination it's covered or not covered. I was just, like I said, covering that possibility. It doesn't ever have to come to fruition.
So when you're revising point number 7, other things you might want to address is the format in which the board is notified. And then number 2 is, the term is used requesting an impacted party. It's clear what requesting is. It's not clear what impacted is. But to be very specific, throughout this process is the issue of keeping informed and apprised the project that is under consideration and the individual or entity that owns or develops it. Because the determination of this board is going to have a significant economic impact on that project and that individual or entity. So, we should be clear about when they're going to receive information about the board.
So I think what you're saying, Jim, is as well as keeping the board informed about their process and their fact finding, we also need to make sure that the business under consideration, whoever that is also informed of where we are in the process, correct?
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Good point. I just assumed, but you were right, we should never assume. What is next? I think we're at the end of the first process, unless there's anything anybody has on 7, A, B, or C?
I have to ask a question.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's just the wording if the majority of the board declines to issue determination. The department's gonna receive requests, sources. The bureau's going to do an investigation, and like the 3 examples Sean shared with us found that the projects are not covered. The board we're not going to issue a determination in those cases.
You don't need to.
We don't need to.
You may decide you don't need to.
Right, so the board may issue a determination, actually covers that scenario already, right? The facts have been presented, the law does not apply. It's very
If you
efficient.
if you agree with the board, you don't need to do anything. If you disagree with the board,
Because the board's
I'm
not
sorry,
making a
the-
formal determination on those projects.
yes, I don't mean the board, the bureau.
Yeah, so those projects have come in through this process, the same process.
Right.
The board didn't issue a formal determination because the facts said,
They agree
That's
with the bureau's
Right.
findings.
and we're not,
You
right,
don't
so
need to.
maybe it's just the language. The board may issue a determination that covers that scenario.
Yeah.
And that could be fairly routine,
Right.
and which would lead to, Peter's, anybody's question, it's fairly rapid, and we've looked at the facts, and we're gonna have a report to that.
Right.
Very expedient and efficient.
Yes.
Okay.
So I would recommend, we have made amendments to this first process piece. I was going to originally take a vote to approve it. But since I know that we're gonna call another meeting in a week or 2 to consider other things, I would ask that we allow the secretary to put that language down for you to see, and you'll vote on it at the next meeting. Because I don't want you voting on something that's not clear, and I wanna make sure, because there've been a lot of moving parts here. That's all right with the board.
So and I agree, but if they're circulated and we want to edit it, are we allowed to do that? That was,
You can only Laura, can they edit in a circulated draft, or do they have to do that in the room at a public meeting?
So you can send edits to Sean, right? And we can provide that, a combined document of all edits or comments or recommendations. It may be cleaner to provide comments, provide that prior to our next board meeting, and then you can have an open discussion about the comments. Because the comments from, one person may conflict with the comments from another, and that's the discussion you would really want to be having, not in email, but rather. So the safest way to do that is for everyone to send any comments or edits they have to Sean, and then where things are consistent, Sean can incorporate. Where things are inconsistent, Sean can provide that information to the board prior to the next meeting.
We could even outline the various suggestions in people's edits, for the next meeting, and encapsulate them for everybody so that it's memorialized properly and.
And it'll be publicly available.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
after today, redo the procedures based upon today's discussion to incorporate as many edits that we talked about today, so that we're at least that much further. That'll be distributed, I'm gonna do that tomorrow, so we have it as soon as possible. And then edits can be sent to me. And like I said, if everybody's consistent on suggested edits, it can just be incorporated for the next proposal. If people are inconsistent, those inconsistent options can be outlined for the board to vote on.
So I think, with your approval, we'll do that, and we'll vote on it at the next meeting. Okay, thank you. I think we have time to try to get through number 2. So Sean, have at it. Good luck.
The board is empowered by labor law section 224C subdivision 5 to issue binding determinations to any public entity or any private or not-for-profit owner or developer as to any particular matter related to an existing or potential covered project. The board will consider all relevant documents, testimony, and materials presented during the hearing by any interested sources, which may include the project owner or the Bureau of Public Works. Hearings addressing a specific project or individual must be confidential pursuant to labor law sections 224-C subdivision 2 and subdivision 5, with one exception. Publication of board determinations shall be made on the department's website, subject to redaction or confidentiality as the board shall deem warranted in accordance with any applicable federal or state statutory or regulatory requirement governing confidentiality and personal privacy. Once a hearing date is selected, notice of the hearing will be sent by the chair to the board members and impacted parties. Any request for testimony or documents shall be issued by the chair on behalf of the board, and the secretary shall assist the chair in drafting such requests. Bureau of Public Work will prepare an updated report with any additional information gathered. The confidential hearing will be conducted as follows. The secretary will read the project details, the Bureau of Public Work report into the record, and provide and use copies of any documentation to the board and into the record. The chair will call witnesses that are present to testify, including a representative from the specific project, as the owner or developer. The chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to question each witness. And after all questioning is complete, the chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to make a statement regarding their conclusions. The chair will then call for a vote to determine if the board is ready to proceed with issuing a determination or wishes to conduct additional fact-finding. If a majority of the board votes for additional fact-finding, then each member may make requests for additional records or testimony to be requested prior to the continuation of the hearing scheduled for a later date. If a majority of the board votes for issuing a final determination, then a second vote will be held for members to vote for the project being covered or not covered by labor law section 224A. The final determination will be decided by a majority vote. Once the board makes the final determination, the secretary shall draft a written determination to issue to the owner developer and post it on the department's website, subject to those necessary redactions required by law.
Okay, so who wants to start?
I got a few things.
Okay,
Number 3, what is an impacted part? And I'm point number 3, and I raised this just earlier, but we need to define what an impacted party is.
I guess in my mind, the owner developer, known contractors, and the, I guess, any public entities providing funding.
are there any other parties that you think? And I think this is something that, again, this may be something that you think about in the intervening week or two before we come back to finish this. I think, read the list again.
The ones that did them?
Yeah,
I would think the owner developers, any known contractors on the project, and any known public entities that are providing public funding to the project.
and to Jim's point, he wants it spelled out.
If we can specify those 3 within the document, is there additional?
Yeah, I would do that, and then if anybody has any other comments, they could add them. In the revised, include them in the revised, I think.
So we'll spell it out. Good catch. Next,
So on the issue of confidentiality and the confidential hearings, is the individuals called before the board to provide testimony, they're bound by confidentiality?
person who's testifying in front of the board?
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know. We can certainly make that.
Right, and then similarly, sort of any documents that are submitted.
To individual projects.
Right, yeah, there might be documentation submitted in these confidential hearings, so is the documentation considered confidential?
I think that, so we would have to sort of do an analysis looking at open meetings
Come up here a
law.
second.
We would, I think the Department of Labor Counsel's Office would be happy to do an analysis looking into the confidentiality requirements from the Freedom of Information Law, 224C, open meetings law, to give you some guidance on what would be confidential under what circumstances and who would be subject to said confidentiality requirements.
Thank you, and just to your last point there would extend to my last point about the issue of the confidentiality hearings is what we as board members can say to who.
Yes.
So for instance, I have a board I'm accountable to.
So
So, right. So, what are we allowed to say about these hearings and to whom are we allowed to say it? probably an easier one is if we get media inquiries, I assume we should just direct that to the commissioner's office. But even issues like that.
That should be, may I add on, look, I serve as a Port Authority Commissioner, and a lot of these confidentiality issues come up. But even to Jim's point about media, I'd like to have that in here somewhere. That the board members are aware that if they do get media inquiries, it should be directed to the commissioner's attention. I think we should all be made aware of that, and that should be the policy. And this way, if there is a media inquiry, we can simply say the procedure is contact the commissioner's office.
So we're gonna.
I'm not at liberty to speak with you.
And I don't know if it needs to be in the procedure or if it's an additional document that they get, but we should spell out what confidentiality.
Yeah, I just think that makes sense. I do. I don't think it should be an informal agreement.
Right, does that make sense?
Yeah, I would like to sort of take it back to speak with our general counsel and have some more research done, and we can propose something at a future meeting.
Thank you.
For your consideration.
Thank you.
I just have one last issue about this section, which is whether or not there's an appeal process. So, if a party has standing and doesn't agree with the determination, just what its next step is.
Per the law, the board's determination is final. I suppose Article 78 would be the only option, no?
Yeah.
Yes, it would be an appeal to the courts through an article.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
I know that was
Thank you.
discussed.
And this is after the initial 45-day period, right? This is going into this next step here. Are we putting any kind of timeline on this?
The hearing procedure?
Yep.
Question, so do we want to set a timeline for within setting the hearing date once you consider the report on potential projects?
How quickly, what?
We can, it's up to the board.
Can. Because we already have all of the fact finding, correct? The hearing is simply scheduling.
I would only offer, having sat in Sean's seat for a little bit, people are going to be unresponsive with requested information. You might be looking to elicit that in a testimony at the hearing. You may not have all the information from all parties that you've requested.
Right.
Sure, I mean, as per the report, the board would understand what is or isn't known yet and what gaps may be, and that would inform how quickly the hearing wants to be set. But if for public information clarity's sake, we're going to set an outside timeline, again, with the caveat of extenuating circumstances, change in circumstances, and do that. I would suggest, since we are subpoenaing people, we want to give it a little time so that people can prepare to respond in person or with documents.
What's a reasonable time to set a hearing, given all of that?
I mean, I usually would want to give people at least a month to respond to a subpoena for personal appearance or records, just for fairness sake. So we could do another 45 days or 60 tops, with that caveat. Again, it can always be set sooner if based on the report. And we have all the information, it only is going to require one witness. You can set it in 30 days, without really much of a problem. But if it's, we can have 15 witnesses we got to coordinate, or we're still missing a bunch of documentations, maybe you want to set it further out.
So if you say within 45 days, that covers it, right?
Maybe within 30 days, unless Mitch would agree to or something. For more time.
Yeah, 30 days.
30? Everybody good with it?
Commissioner, can I ask one question? Just in terms of impacted parties, we're talking about owners, contractors. Is there going to be specific guidance in these procedures? I don't know if this is the right place for it, about their obligation under the law to maintain payroll records subject to FOIL.
I think there is guidance on
They want to make sure, because that's something else that if they're not aware of, that can become a serious problem under this law, right? Right?
Once we get to the stage where the board is, made some of their determinations regarding the recommendations, definitions, things like that. We can do additional FAQ information to get out there, but as a basis, the form I mentioned, that's the department's responsibility for the planning project, which would also be a request for termination. That's contained in there. There's an outline of 224.
Okay, okay. As long as that, you know, they're aware of their obligation.
Mentions the subject, you're subject to the rules of 220 in these circumstances, which we,
Okay,
it's not the rules of 220, like, by the way, you're subject to these rules, which is also certified payrolls maintained.
right. Payroll records. Okay, just want to make sure that, again, I'm thinking about impacted parties, that, if, you know, that they're aware of what their obligations are, so they don't have a problem later on.
So hearing schedule within 30 days. What else? Jim, you don't have additional comments on this one?
All right, good.
All right. Again, I'm going to have this written up clearly so everybody knows what they're voting on. We'll have the response from council at next meeting about confidentiality. Great. So now we have our third procedural process for consideration.
Labor Law Section 224C, Subdivision 2, and 4 require the board hold a public hearing before making any recommendations that apply broadly to all projects. For example, regarding the minimum threshold, percentages of public funds and dollar threshold for projects as set by law, certain construction work excluded as a covered project, the definition of construction for purposes of 224A, and particular instances of benefits, monies, or credits as to whether or not they should constitute public funds. At any meeting of the board member may request that a hearing be held regarding any issue or issues under the board's purview. The chair will call for a vote, and if a majority of the board agrees, a hearing will be held on the matter. If a hearing is to be held, board members will provide availability to the secretary, and a hearing will be scheduled in accordance with the open meeting law and labor law 224C notice requirements of any public hearing. Each member will be given an opportunity to make requests for documentation and testimony to be secured for the hearing. Any request for testimony or documents shall be issued by the chair on behalf of the board. The secretary will assist the chair in drafting such requests. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. The secretary will introduce the matter and provide and introduce copies of any documentation to the board and into the record. The chair will call witnesses that are present to testify. The chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to question each witness. Members of the public may be given an opportunity to speak on the record with the time limit determined by the chair at the hearing, or provide written testimony, or both. At the conclusion of the questioning and public comments, the chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to make a statement or comments regarding their observations and conclusions, or ask each other questions, or both. The chair will then call for a vote to determine if the board is ready to close the hearing or adjourn for additional fact-finding. If the matter is adjourned for additional fact-finding, then any additional documentation or testimony sought by the board members will be requested by the secretary in order to complete the hearing at a future date. If the hearing is closed, then the secretary will reduce the board's recommendation in writing and distribute to the board members to review within 7 days. The public meeting will be scheduled within 3 weeks in accordance with all proper notice requirements required by law to vote whether to adopt the written recommendation as the board's final recommendation. The Commissioner of Labor has authority to adopt the board's final recommendation as a rule or regulation pursuant to Section 224A, subdivision 3 of the labor law.
Okay. Comments?
So if a member of the public submits written testimony, as a board member, I would want to receive it in advance of the meeting, particularly if I'm asked to vote the same day. So we should have some cutoff for written testimony to be submitted.
Right, good point. What's a reasonable?
How far in advance would the board want to get any submitted?
48 hours.
Yeah,
7 days.
48 hours.
48 hours work,
Okay,
hours is the cutoff for the
Sure.
written testimony.
Why should they notify us within, people showing up that morning to testify? And we should know how many people are testifying. I would just say that.
I don't know that we have a,
So generally speaking, with a hearing involving a public comment, you would just have an open forum.
Yeah.
That's why we put time limits on it, generally speaking. 2 to 3 minutes is standard for most public hearings, but traditionally, if someone shows up desiring to be heard by the board, that's the purpose of the public hearing.
so is 48 hours previous to the day of the hearing good for everybody?
I think so.
Okay, 48 hours it is. What else?
On number 3, just a few questions to clarify is how is the agenda of the meeting set? Is it posted publicly, and if so, when? I guess it would be, it's a public hearing. And where would it be posted?
So we posted it on the DOL website, I see.
Okay,
And how do we post for this meeting? Oh, really?
Well, there's posting of an agenda, and then there's the notice requirements, which are 2 separate things. Notice requirements are required by law, be submitted, generally speaking, if it's a pre-scheduled non-emergency meeting, it would be 7 days prior to the meeting. You would do 72 hours prior to the meeting, you would do the public notice. If the meeting is scheduled 7 days before the meeting, emergency meeting, then you would do it as soon as practicable. So that would be notice at the time and place of the public subsidy meeting. In terms of the agenda, there's no requirement in the open meetings law or 224C or any other of the various laws that affect this board that an agenda be developed or published. So the board has discretion with regard to an agenda.
So what say you? Does anyone have a desire for a particular agenda to be posted? I mean, the agenda that we have is pretty
I
flat,
believe we posted it on our website
right?
24 hours prior to the meeting.
That's fine. Right. Yeah, no, there's no objection to doing that.
Okay, so we'll post an agenda 24 hours prior, give public notice. Anything else in this section that anybody wants to bring up?
Hey.
It's pretty straightforward. So I think we could actually move to a vote on procedure 3, noting that we're going to have the cutoff for submission of written testimony 48 hours before the meeting. We'll give public notice as Laura outlined, and we'll post an agenda 24 hours prior to the meeting. Those are the only changes to this, to procedure 3. So I would, is there a motion to accept?
I so moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor of this, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? Fabulous. Thank you so much. We passed the procedure. Excellent. I really, first of all, I want to thank you for a very engaged conversation on these procedures. It's not, these are not easy matters. And I think you've all brought really important questions to us, and we're going to go back and rework it and make sure that we get the language nailed down, because that's a really important part of what we're doing here. We have a half an hour before our scheduled time is up. If you would like, I can take us to executive session and we can have a discussion of the materials that we sent you for half an hour, if that is agreeable.
I'm in favor of that.
Madam Chair,
Let's go.
I'd just like to ask for the floor, if I may. I'd like to present a letter that was put together by a number of builder organizations and a number of builder developers that is requests a hearing to further examine the economic conditions and changes in the financial conditions since the law was enacted. If I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And actually, I'll, for brevity's sake, I'll skip over certain sections. But since labor law 224 was signed into law, there have been several challenges and several changes, which include a doubling of the interest rate on construction loans, a 45% increase on construction material costs, significant increases in labor costs, significant supply chain delays and shortages. Governor Hochul clearly sees the production of housing as a major priority for New York State. And while her bold and ambitious plan to spur the development of 800,000 residential units over the next 10 years did not pass this year, it certainly brought our state's housing crisis to the forefront. Much of the housing debate was focused on Long Island and Westchester, where the lack of diverse housing options is most apparent. One clear lesson from this year's legislative session is that any successful housing policy must protect and or bolster a housing project's economic viability, and if a project is not economically viable, it will not be built. That same lesson could and should be applied with Labor Law 224A. Furthermore, the current challenges created by this law are not limited to residential development. Major commercial and industrial developments, which are vital to our economy, as they are our chief job creators, will be similarly adversely affected. Given the aforementioned economic shifts that occurred since Labor Law 224A's enactment, projects that will now be required to use prevailing wage will struggle to find financing and regrettably not move forward. In addition, many financial institutions recently enacted new policies that tighten lending and require more intense scrutiny. This financial trend further exacerbates a project's ability to obtain funding. We want to be clear that this is not about union versus non-union. Many of the undersigned developers and contractors employ a majority of union labor. The problem that we face is that prevailing wages at the highest end of the union scale will be applied to all labor. Section 224C, Part 7 of the legislation provides that in the event that the board finds that there is or likely would be a significant negative economic impact of implementing the prevailing wage requirements provided for in Section 224A of this article, the board may temporarily delay the implementation of such requirements beyond January 1st, 2022. Such a delay may be effective statewide or effective only in a region of the state as defined by the Regional Economic Development Councils. In making such a determination to delay, the board should consult the department's Division of Research and Statistics, the United States Department of Labor, the Federal Reserve Board of New York, and other economic experts. The board shall reference well-established economic indices and accepted economic factors tied to the construction industry, including but not limited to construction industry, employment, wages, and overall construction activity. Given the above, we respectfully request a pause in the implementation process to give time to examine the impact of prevailing wage on the private construction industry. We also requested if there is a successor property tax abatement program known as 421A, in which New York City developments are exempt from Labor Law 224A, that projects employing IDA property tax abatement benefits similarly be similarly exempted. And what I'd like to do is to offer a motion, if I may, that pursuant to 224C Part 7, which I've already gone over, that, and given that that based on significant changes in the economic factors over the last 2 years that have adversely impacted housing, and commercial, and industrial development, that there be a hearing by the Public Subsidy Board to consider a request to pause the implementation of 224A, to give time to examine the impact of prevailing wage on the private construction industry and the overall economy. I'd also like to, well, let's start with that.
Commissioner, will you have discussion on this?
Sure. There's a motion on the floor. I need a second before we.
Well, the motion should, when we have motions, it goes to discussion before we call the question.
Okay,
I thought we are following Robert's Rules of Order, correct?
you got me.
Goes to discussion. So on discussion,
Gary.
I would like to say again, with all due respect, I vehemently disagree with Mr. Florio in his position. I'd like also for the board to be informed who are the authors of that request, who are the parties for the board's edification. It's my belief that local law 224A is in effect, has been in effect, and whether or not it is determined to be a 224A project or not, the prevailing rate. The basis of that is on the subsidy that it will receive and the size and the threshold. I'm very familiar with the conditions in which has been raised in that letter, but there are billions upon billions of dollars that are being moved forward in the prevailing wage sector, frankly covered under project labor agreements, that we've been able to move forward. And I totally disagree with the fact that the need to delay. If a project is not economically viable in the current construct, it is not economically viable. And I don't believe that the prevailing wage will be the determining factor in that case. Again, we believe the law has been in effect since January 22nd. We are now in July almost of 2023. And any further delay on implementation of the law, in me, only thwarts the purpose of the law that was adopted and signed into law. And again, I vehemently oppose this at this time. The law is in effect. The law should be followed. And again, without being overly cynical, anything to do with prevailing wage, generally speaking, the development community, I say this respectfully, resists because they feel they lose the ability to work open shop or pay below prevailing wage, in some cases significantly below prevailing wage. It has been an ongoing battle, if you will, between many employer associations and development associations over the issue of prevailing wage. However, the legislature and the governor did pass this into statute. It is the law of the land. And I request that the law be followed and enacted as constructed in the statute. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there other discussion?
Yes, I'd like to speak. Just responding to Gary's last comment, I just would like to note that our organization has in the past backed prevailing wage for building service workers. It's not an ideological issue. It's an issue of math. The math is very challenging when it comes to the construction trades in New York City. That is documented. With respect to the application of 224A, we would just make the point that we don't understand how the law could be applied today, given that, number one, we haven't defined key terms. Number two, we just spent an hour and a half trying to straighten out what the process is. And number three, we don't even have a full board, if I'm correct. So, with that said.
It's no surprise. It's no surprise. No, it's no surprise that the real estate community does not want this law to move forward as expeditiously as it should. Let's put it on the table. I mean, I understand we could have separate offline conversations, Jim, about your analysis and current analysis we have on the impacts of prevailing wage. There's two sides to that. Prevailing wage, I disagree that it impacts projects such as these the way you think it does. And we have plenty of data to support that. So we disagree, at least I disagree. I don't know what other board members feel. I would like to hear from other board members that are present. We do have a quorum to see what other board members perhaps here. We've heard from Jim, maybe Hope, or the other board members in Albany.
May I just respond?
Yeah, I mean, again, and Peter, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I've been fighting this for 30 years, this issue.
I understand. And what we're asking for is just a hearing to examine the economic impact of the changes that have occurred in the last 2 years since the legislation was enacted. That's what we're asking.
I understand.
So we can look at that. I have a copy of the letter.
Please, I would like to know who the,
So please send it to Sean and we can circulate it to the board. That
I'll be distributing that to all board members, yeah. If we're trying to distribute that'd be great. Thank you.
My only comment, to this is that, we seem to have delayed a lot already. And any further delay, to me, just appears to be a tactic of those who are opposed to the legislation from the genesis of it. So with that, I thought we moved expeditiously today. I think we have procedures are in line and a way to move forward and ratify them in a quick way. I think we have a momentum and we should continue that. So I am opposed to the motion that was put forward.
So I believe that the law is in effect, but I also think there should be consideration while we are implementing the law to look at the impact of current market conditions related to prevailing wage. And we should not move forward with any votes until we've cleared up the procedures that we just discussed.
I'm just saying, as far as the question, I know there's a motion, I think hasn't been seconded, but as far as hearings, I mean, that's, to me, the legislature, that's what they did. We went through this whole process to come up with the subsidy board. It's not what everybody envisioned initially, but that's where the hearing should take place. I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to get the procedural things finalized and move forward. We'll address the cases as they come.
The consideration that's being requested is provided for in the legislation.
So there's a question on the floor asking this board to hold a hearing. It has not been seconded. I'm waiting to hear a timely second. Motion fails for a timely second.
Second.
I would call for a point of order, and if we have counsel that would rule on it.
And I'm sorry,
You're not a
Not a parliamentarian.
Yeah, you're not a parliamentarian. So generally speaking, what happens is when the chair says, there's a motion on the floor and I'm waiting for a timely second.
Right.
That's the indication that whoever needs to second this motion needs to get their second on the floor.
once the chair calls for termination, it's done.
So for future reference, if there's a motion on the floor and I put it out there for a second and there is no timely second, you have,
That's the rules.
you don't want to vote on it.
The chair has made a determination.
So it has failed for a timely second. Thank you.
Timely second, which means if anybody's gonna second it then. Nobody seconded, so she said, with no second, no timely second, motion has failed, then you second.
Okay, so now we have 10 minutes left. I'm not sure it's time enough to really delve into the package of examples, unless you want to take the 10 minutes to have a quick discussion. What does the board think?
I think it's worth it.
You're worth it?
Yeah.
Okay. So before we go into executive session, I will remind everybody that this board will be holding meetings on the last Wednesday of each quarter through 2023 and 2024, except during the holiday in December. The next meeting is scheduled for December 27th, 2023. The complete schedule is on our website. Just a heads up, we will be scheduling a next meeting to consider these proposals that we've worked on. And that will be done. Anybody who needs to schedule anything beyond that, please contact Sean. During the next portion of our agenda, the board will be discussing specific projects that the board received prior to today. Consistent with our recently adopted procedure and the confidentiality requirements set forth in Labor Law Section 224C5, I move that the board enter into executive session. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of moving into executive session, please say aye.
Well, just that.
Opposed, please say nay. Not voting. Okay, We are now going to end the live stream and we're closing the doors to the public to enter the executive session. When the executive session has been adjourned, we'll reopen the meeting rooms to the public. I'd like to welcome back any members of the public who are attending today's meeting. No actions were taken during the board's executive session. We have now concluded discussing today's agenda items. I want to thank the members of the board for their continued service to New York State and for a very robust discussion. I really appreciate the dedication you bring to this topic. Materials, including a recording of today's meeting, will be posted on the boards and committees section of the Department of Labor's website. As we've reached the conclusion of today's meeting, I move that we adjourn. Do I have a second?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Never. And abstentions, thank you very much. We are,
Thank you. Good job, Commissioner.
thank you very much. It was a great
Board
discussion.
members.
To be continued.